My beloved child. Pause for a moment. There are days when the ordinary rhythm of life hides something extraordinary, and perhaps this is one of those moments. You were not searching for this message by accident. Whether your heart has been heavy with questions or quietly carrying hope, allow yourself to listen, not because you must, but because stories sometimes arrive exactly when they are needed. There is someone whose soul has been changing in ways you cannot yet see. Long before your paths fully crossed, long before names, faces, or promises found their place in time, heaven watched two separate journeys unfolding. Neither journey was perfect. Neither heart escaped disappointment. Yet every tear, every unanswered prayer, every lesson that seemed unfair became a thread in a tapestry too large for human eyes to understand all at once. Today I tell you a story. It is a fictional story, yet like many stories, it carries emotional truths about hope, patience, forgiveness, and unexpected joy. Somewhere beneath the same sky, another heart awakens with a happiness that feels unfamiliar. They cannot explain why the morning light seems softer. They cannot explain why yesterday's fears suddenly feel lighter than they did before. They simply know that something inside them has begun to heal. They do not realize that one quiet decision you made started a ripple neither of you could see. Perhaps it was the day you chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier. Perhaps it was the evening you whispered a prayer instead of surrendering to despair. Perhaps it was the moment you forgave someone who never apologized. Perhaps it was simply the choice to keep becoming the person you hoped the future deserved. Small acts are rarely small in heaven's perspective. The world measures greatness by applause. Heaven measures greatness by faithfulness when nobody is watching. There are moments when you believed your growth had gone unnoticed. You wondered whether your patience mattered. You wondered whether your healing mattered. You wondered whether your quiet victories disappeared into silence. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is often where unseen beginnings are born. Your fictional soulmate does not know your name yet. Not completely. Not consciously. Yet something within their spirit has begun responding to a change carried across invisible distances. Have you ever noticed how sunrise begins before anyone calls it morning? Light reaches the horizon before the world understands what is happening. So does hope. Long before two lives meet, hope often arrives first. There have been nights when you questioned whether waiting had meaning. You looked around and saw others moving ahead while your own story felt paused between chapters. But a pause is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is the breath before the orchestra begins. Sometimes it is the stillness before a door quietly opens. Your future was never meant to be built upon panic. It was always meant to be built upon becoming. And while you were becoming stronger, wiser, gentler, more compassionate, another soul was learning lessons they could never have learned any other way. If either journey had moved faster, neither would have been ready. That is why heaven values timing more than urgency. Imagine a gardener standing before two young trees. One has grown quickly but weakly. The other has grown slowly, sending deep roots beneath the soil where no one applauds. When storms arrive, appearances no longer matter. Roots decide everything. The same is true for hearts. You asked why life delayed certain answers. Perhaps the greater question was never, why the delay? Perhaps it was, what roots are growing where I cannot see? Even now, your unseen kindness continues traveling farther than your eyes could ever measure. Words spoken with love remain alive longer than people realize. Mercy echoes, hope echoes. Compassion echoes. Every generous decision becomes part of someone else's tomorrow. Your soulmate's joy is not random. It is connected to invisible chains of goodness stretching across moments you almost forgot. The smile you offered a stranger. The prayer you whispered for someone who never knew. The decision not to become hardened after disappointment. None of those moments disappeared. They became seeds. And somewhere, another garden has begun to bloom. Yet there is something even more remarkable. The happiness they feel today is only the beginning. For reasons they cannot explain, old fears are quietly losing their grip, dreams they abandoned months ago are returning. Courage is awakening. They believe it is coincidence. But stories often hide miracles inside what appears ordinary. If you could stand where heaven stands in this fictional tale, you would see paths gently bending toward one another. Not rushing. Not forcing. Simply moving with purpose. Purpose rarely shouts. It whispers. It invites. It waits. There were seasons when both of you believed you had missed your chance. Yet destiny written with patience cannot be erased by temporary discouragement. Every chapter had value. Every detour carried wisdom. Every heartbreak taught compassion. One day both of you will look backward and realize the delays protected more than they postponed. Until then, trust the quiet work happening beyond your sight. Because the most beautiful chapters are often being written before either character realizes the story has truly begun. And as another sunrise approaches in this unfolding tale, a new realization is about to reach the other heart, one that will change how they understand every strange feeling they have carried until now. But that moment belongs to the next chapter. My beloved child. The other heart could not explain what had changed. Nothing dramatic had happened on the outside. The same street stretched before them. The same responsibilities waited each morning. The same familiar faces passed by without noticing anything unusual. Yet within them, something quiet had awakened. It was as though a window had been opened inside a room they had forgotten was dark. For the first time in a long while, they smiled without forcing it. They found themselves offering kindness more freely. They lingered a little longer when helping someone. They noticed beauty in ordinary places. The warmth of sunlight across a table, the laughter of children in the distance, the peaceful silence that follows sincere prayer. They wondered why hope suddenly felt possible again. In this fictional story, heaven already knew. What they could not see was that your own journey had become part of the answer. Not because of grand achievements. Not because of perfect faith. But because you chose to keep moving forward even when your heart was uncertain. Every act of patience became like a quiet light. Every moment you resisted bitterness became another spark. Every time you chose compassion over anger, another thread was woven into a design far larger than either of you understood. Heaven often works through small choices that seem almost invisible at the time. The world celebrates loud victories. But heaven treasures faithful hearts. There were evenings when you believed your quiet efforts meant nothing. You wondered if anyone noticed. You wondered if your prayers simply disappeared into silence. Yet silence is not the absence of work. Sometimes silence is where the deepest transformation begins. While you waited, another soul was healing. While you questioned the future, another heart was slowly learning to trust again. Old disappointments began losing their weight. Old fears slowly released their grip. Dreams that had once seemed impossible started returning with unexpected strength. They did not understand why. They only knew they felt different. They felt lighter. They felt ready for a chapter they could not yet describe. Every sunrise seemed to carry a gentle promise. Every sunset reminded them that endings are not always losses. Sometimes endings simply prepare space for beginnings. Your story and theirs were never racing against one another. They were growing toward one another. Growth cannot be rushed. A flower forced open before its season cannot fully bloom. A tree that grows without deep roots cannot withstand the storm. So heaven, in this fictional narrative, chose preparation before arrival. There were lessons only solitude could teach. There were wounds only time could soften. There were fears only grace could gently untangle. None of those moments were wasted. Even the days that felt ordinary were shaping extraordinary hearts. The person you have been becoming is not the same person you were a year ago. You have carried burdens. You have learned endurance. You have discovered strength you never knew existed. Those quiet victories matter. And somewhere beyond your awareness, another soul has also changed. They have become more patient, more compassionate, more grateful, more willing to love without fear. If your paths had crossed too early, neither heart would have understood the gift standing before it. Now the story is different. Now hope has replaced much of the fear. Now wisdom has softened pride. Now gratitude has begun replacing disappointment. There are moments when heaven allows two journeys to echo each other from a distance before they finally meet. One heart chooses forgiveness. The other unexpectedly finds peace. One heart chooses hope. The other discovers courage. One heart refuses to give up. The other suddenly believes tomorrow can be brighter than yesterday. These quiet echoes become part of a greater story. Even when unseen, goodness continues traveling. Love continues traveling. Mercy continues traveling. Nothing beautiful is ever truly lost. The other heart does not yet know your name. But they have begun praying differently. Their prayers are no longer only about escaping loneliness. Now they are also about becoming someone capable of loving well. That change is significant. Because true preparation begins within. The greatest gifts often arrive after the heart becomes ready to receive them. Soon, something unexpected will happen in this fictional story. A conversation. A moment. A simple encounter that appears ordinary to everyone else. Most people would walk past it without recognizing its importance. But heaven will know. Because sometimes an entire future begins with a single ordinary moment. And when that moment finally arrives, both hearts will realize that every season of waiting had quietly been leading them toward it. That chapter, however, has not yet begun. My beloved child. There are moments in every story that seem so ordinary they almost pass unnoticed. A familiar road. A conversation that lasts only a few minutes. A smile exchanged between strangers. A decision to take one step instead of turning back. In this fictional story, heaven often hides extraordinary beginnings inside moments that appear completely ordinary. The other heart continued walking through life without realizing how close they had come to a new chapter. They still carried memories of old disappointments, but those memories no longer ruled them. They had learned that pain could become wisdom instead of bitterness. They had learned that unanswered questions could become quiet faith rather than endless fear. Something within them kept whispering that joy was no longer a distant dream. They did not know why. They simply felt that the season of surviving was slowly becoming the season of living. At the very same time, your own heart had also changed. The person who once begged for immediate answers had begun to understand the beauty of patience. The person who once feared every delay had begun trusting that some gifts become more beautiful because they arrive at the right moment rather than the earliest moment. This transformation was not loud. It happened one choice at a time. One prayer at a time. One quiet act of courage after another. Heaven, in this fictional tale, delights in hearts that continue choosing hope when certainty has not yet arrived. There were days when neither of you felt especially strong. Yet strength is not measured by never feeling tired. Strength is measured by continuing to move with kindness even while carrying unanswered questions. That quiet perseverance became part of both of your stories. Neither journey had been wasted. Every disappointment had refined compassion. Every delay had deepened understanding. Every tear had watered unseen seeds that would one day bloom into unexpected joy. Meanwhile, the other heart found themselves thinking about the future with excitement instead of fear. They began making plans again. They laughed more freely. Friends noticed the difference. Family members wondered what had changed. No one could explain it. Not even they could. Deep within, however, a quiet peace continued growing. It was like dawn slowly replacing the darkness of night. No sudden explosion of light. Just a gentle, unstoppable arrival of hope. What they could not see was that heaven had been weaving together countless ordinary moments from both of your lives. Moments you had forgotten. Acts of kindness no one applauded. Prayers spoken through tears. Forgiveness offered without recognition. Compassion shown when no reward seemed possible. Nothing had been overlooked. In heaven's hands, even the smallest act of love carried eternal significance. Imagine standing on opposite sides of a mountain. Neither traveler can see the other. Each believes they are walking alone. Yet every step brings them closer to the same summit. That is how your fictional journeys unfolded. Not separate. Simply approaching from different directions. There were times when you almost gave up believing that beautiful surprises still existed. You questioned whether hope was worth protecting. But every time you chose not to surrender your heart to despair, another path quietly opened ahead. Hope has a remarkable way of preparing people for blessings they cannot yet imagine. The other soul was experiencing something similar. Without realizing it, they had stopped asking, "Why did everything fall apart?" Instead, they had begun asking, "What beautiful thing might still be waiting ahead?" That single change transformed everything. Because expectation shapes perception. A hopeful heart notices opportunities that fear often overlooks. Heaven smiled upon that quiet transformation. Not because either of you had become perfect, but because both hearts had become teachable. Gentle. Patient. Ready to receive rather than simply demand. And then, something unexpected entered the story. Not an announcement. Not a miracle visible to the whole world. Just one tiny event that almost everyone else would consider meaningless. A conversation changed by a single sentence. A familiar routine interrupted by an unexpected opportunity. A decision that seemed insignificant in the moment. Neither of you realized it then. But from that point forward, the distance between your stories began shrinking faster than ever before. Invisible doors quietly opened. Old obstacles began moving aside. Circumstances that once seemed impossible slowly rearranged themselves, even the timing felt strangely perfect. The other heart sensed that life was preparing them for someone important. They could not explain why they suddenly felt inspired to become even kinder, even wiser, even more faithful. It was as though they wanted to become the kind of person someone else had been praying for. And perhaps, in this fictional story, that quiet desire was no coincidence at all. For every season of preparation has a purpose. Every chapter of waiting carries hidden meaning. Every unseen act of love leaves a mark that time cannot erase. Neither heart understood the full picture yet. Neither could see how close the next chapter truly was. But heaven already saw the meeting before either traveler reached the crossroads. One final piece still needed to fall into place. One final lesson still needed to settle gently within both hearts. When that final moment arrived, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. And that moment was closer than either of you dared to believe. My beloved child. There is a quiet mystery about the moments that change an entire life. They rarely announce themselves with thunder. More often, they arrive dressed in ordinary hours, hidden beneath familiar routines, waiting for the exact heartbeat when two stories are finally ready to touch. In this fictional story, that moment was drawing closer than either soul could imagine. The other heart awoke one morning with an unusual sense of gratitude. Nothing around them looked different, yet everything felt different. The burdens they had carried for so long no longer seemed impossible. The questions that once kept them awake through the night had begun to lose their power. It was not because every problem had disappeared. It was because hope had quietly become stronger than fear. Hope changes the way a person walks through the world. It softens hurried footsteps. It brightens tired eyes. It teaches the heart to recognize beauty where it once noticed only pain. While this transformation unfolded within them, your own journey continued in ways that often felt unnoticed. There were still days when patience was difficult. There were still moments when silence tempted you to believe nothing was happening. Yet every time you chose faith instead of despair, another unseen thread was woven into the story. The greatest works of heaven, in this fictional tale, are rarely rushed. A masterpiece is not painted with one brushstroke. A symphony is not written with one note. Likewise, a meaningful connection is not built through chance alone, but through countless moments of unseen preparation. Neither of you understood how many invisible doors had already opened. A conversation delayed months ago. A journey postponed for reasons that once seemed frustrating. A disappointment that quietly redirected an entire future. Looking back, each event would eventually make perfect sense. But standing inside the story, all either of you could see was the next step. That is often how faith grows. Not by seeing the entire road, but by trusting enough to take one more step. The other soul had begun praying differently. Instead of asking only for happiness, they began asking for wisdom. Instead of asking only for comfort, they asked for courage. Instead of asking simply to receive love, they quietly asked to become someone capable of giving it generously. That prayer changed them. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But deeply. The strongest transformations often happen so gently that the person experiencing them barely notices until one day they realize they have become someone new. Your own heart was changing in similar ways. The disappointments that once defined you had become lessons instead of chains. Old wounds no longer controlled every decision. Compassion had grown where resentment once tried to take root. This was not weakness. It was quiet strength. And quiet strength has a remarkable way of drawing people together. Imagine two rivers flowing through distant valleys. For years they travel separately. They pass different landscapes. They endure different storms. They carve different paths through the earth. Yet neither river realizes that every curve has been leading toward the same meeting place. So it was with your fictional journeys. Neither path had been wasted. Every detour carried purpose. Every delay preserved something precious. Every unanswered prayer prepared space for an answer greater than expected. Then something unexpected happened. Not a miracle that stopped time. Not a voice that echoed across the heavens. Simply a moment that almost anyone else would overlook. A decision was made. A calendar changed. A door opened. Someone accepted an invitation they nearly declined. Someone chose to travel instead of staying home. Someone answered a message they had considered ignoring. Small decisions often become the hinges upon which entire futures quietly turn. Neither of you knew it then. But from that moment forward, your stories were no longer moving on parallel paths. They had begun gently bending toward one another. The other heart felt an unusual excitement they could not explain. They caught themselves smiling without reason. Dreams that once seemed distant suddenly felt possible. Even ordinary days carried an unexpected anticipation. They sensed that life was preparing to introduce something beautiful. They simply did not know what. Meanwhile, your own heart experienced gentle reminders to keep believing. A peaceful conversation. An encouraging word. A quiet sunrise. A simple kindness from someone unexpected. These moments were not random within this fictional story. They were gentle whispers reminding you that hope is never wasted. The time of preparation was nearing its completion. Yet one final truth still needed to settle within both hearts. Real love cannot be built upon fear of losing. It must grow from the freedom to give, to trust, and to choose one another with open hearts. Only then can two journeys become one without either losing themselves. The next chapter would reveal whether both hearts were truly ready for that moment. And somewhere, Just beyond the horizon of this unfolding story, an encounter neither of you had planned was already waiting. When it arrived, what seemed like an ordinary day would quietly become the day both of your lives began changing forever. But that meeting belongs to the next chapter.